Podcasting 2.0 is comprised of three main components. 1. Podcast Index. 2. The Podcast Namespace. And 3. Value for value. The mission and goal for Podcasting 2.0 is as follows. The Podcast Index is here to preserve, protect, and extend the open, independent podcasting ecosystem. They also state that their goal is to retool podcasting to a platform of value exchange that includes developers with podcasters and listeners. I'm going to break these main components down, and you're not going to want to skip any because they have huge implications on podcasting itself. Podcast Index is an open, categorized index that will always be available for free and for any use. So instead of being dependent on Apple or any other directory, this is an open source movement that allows app developers to access all podcasts and not a curated list that you might pull from Apple. As we've seen, Apple can pick and choose who's in and who's left out of their directory. And by default, any apps that use Apple's API will also be minus those podcasts that Apple has omitted. You don't have to stray too far into the fringe of alleged conspiracy theorists in order to think about a scenario in which something you think you say that's harmless can bring about the cancel brigade that wants you deplatformed. Imagine, instead of this being YouTube, imagine if I were doing a review video podcast and one of the companies that I gave a negative review on said that this was harmful to their product and they wanted me removed, or made a concerted effort to impact potential sponsors, and you can kind of see where I'm headed with this. Who gets to determine what you can and cannot say? And without a gatekeeper curating a directory, there's no central point for a big company or a government to put pressure on. So as long as you can host your RSS feed and media, you essentially can't be canceled. The Podcast Namespace. I'm not going to go through all the namespace tags that they have available at this time, but I'm going to go through some of them and give you just a brief overview on what they do. So podcast locked. When this value is present and set to yes, the podcast feed cannot be imported or migrated to other platforms that respect the tag. So think of it as a security lock. So instead of having to do email address confirmation, this tag helps keep your podcast locked down. Podcast transcript simply links to a transcript or closed caption file. Podcast chapters links to an external file containing chapter data for the episode. Podcast soundbite points to one or more soundbites within a podcast episode. The intended use includes episode previews, discoverability, audiogram generation, episode highlights, and more. Podcast person. This element specifies the person of interest to the podcast. It's primarily intended to identify people like hosts, co-hosts, and guests. Podcast location. This tag is intended to describe the location of editorial focus for a podcast's content. A really big one is podcast alternate enclosure. This element is meant to provide different versions of or companion media to the main file. So just think you're sending an audio file down the chute, plus you can have a PDF. Pretty cool concept. And this is the one I'm most excited about. Podcast live item. The live item tag is used for a feed to deliver a live audio or video stream to podcast apps. That's going to be big. As you can see, many of these tags could enhance the engagement and overall experience of your podcast community. Now, how I pitch Podcast 2.0 compliant apps. If you're subscribed to this podcast in a legacy app like Apple Podcasts, it can take up to 24 hours for the feed to refresh after I've released a new episode. But if you're on a modern Podcasting 2.0 app, episodes update in less than 60 seconds after I release them. You can head to newpodcastapps.com. Under filters, use the supported elements that interest you most and the platform you need the app to work on. That's newpodcastapps.com. In a minute, I'm going to get to how quickly my episodes update in a Podcasting 2.0 app. But first, value for value. when we're talking about value for value, these podcasts are set up to receive Satoshis. A Satoshi is the smallest unit of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. These payments are received in real time over the Lightning Network using compatible Podcasting 2.0 apps. And they encompass the following tags. Podcast value. This element designates the cryptocurrency or payment layer that will be used, the transport method for transacting the payments, and a suggested amount denominated in the given cryptocurrency. Podcast value recipient. The value recipient tag designates various destinations for payments to be sent during consumption of the enclosed media. Each recipient is considered to receive a split of the total payment according to the number of shares given in the split attribute. But wait, there's more. Remember I talked about how quickly podcasts update on a Podcasting 2.0 app. I use Podcast Addict. After release, my most recent episodes have updated as quickly as 20 seconds. On their website, they say the average time is 45 seconds. That is still ridiculous. 60 seconds is ridiculous. 2 minutes would be ridiculous. 5 minutes would be ridiculous. I've been on Apple Podcasts and all the other apps since 2006, and getting an update in seconds is unheard of. While all of this is amazing, I do have some questions and potential concerns. First, do I have time to do all the extras that the podcast namespace affords me? It's great to have a lot of options, but if you don't implement them, then they're no good to you. So can I dedicate time to doing the chapters and images and all that stuff? Or can I dole that out to community members? Will legacy apps ever support these tags? Nah. Which means we'll have to offboard them from legacy apps onto Podcasting 2.0 compliant apps. And that's going to take time. But in the meantime, can we move enough people over to these apps in order for those developers to get the value back that they're offering? And what happens when our communities become fractured, when we have some people on legacy apps and other people on Podcasting 2.0 apps? Does that damage the overall community? Because I could be talking about something that somebody on a grandpa app isn't going to have access to or even understand. I've been at this since 2006. So I have a lot of PayPal recurring charges that come through, and the people behind those recurring charges, not sure if they're going to be sending me Bitcoin. Because I think it's a hard sell to get Gen Xers or boomers to go get a wallet and send me sats. They'll be looking for a physical wallet at their local Walmart. And before you think I'm making fun of old people, I'm a Gen Xer and literally one concussion away from putting masking tape on the back of my cell phone to tell me how to operate it. As I've alluded to, onboarding is going to be a major hurdle unless they can simplify this whole process. And one I think about all the time, because I'm cheap, is the volatility of cryptocurrency. What if the $100 you gave me suddenly becomes $25? I know, that $100 you gave me could also turn into $500. But you see where I'm going with the volatility. Overall, I have to say, Podcasting 2.0 couldn't have come at a better time. We're smack dab into cancel culture and people being silenced for whatever reason. Whether you agree with certain opinions or disagree with other opinions is irrelevant. Most of us can agree that we would like our own ability to express ourselves. So check out podcastindex.org and newpodcastapps.com. Thank you.